Well, good morning, church, and welcome to this Friday's devotion from a distance. I'd like to share a bit of a personal story with you this morning, and that is with my battle with hair loss. I'll never forget the day it finally occurred to me that my hair was actually falling out. It was a chilly October evening, and I was at home sitting at my desk doing some math homework. As I sat there making graphs, I began to notice little dark brown hairs falling down onto the white paper below. Now, something you need to know about me is that at this time, I had what one would call a beauty flow. I had nice, thick, curly, long hair. I was a hockey player in the early 2000s, so naturally long hair just kind of came with the territory. And I had this habit of running my hand through my lush mane every now and again. But now, every time when I did it, hair would fall. The reason this stuck out to me so much was because it was such a shock. I didn't expect it. Shortly after this day, I began waking up to loose hair on my pillowcases. I found hair on my fingers after a shower. Hair in my helmet after hockey practice. Hair was everywhere. How could this be happening? This wasn't fair. I was only 17 years old. Within a few months, I had to begin strategically doing my hair each morning so that the thinning spots could be covered. And then it was a few months later that I realized that it was no longer even possible to hide the fact that my hair was thinning. It was falling out like leaves from a tree in the fall. There were nights where I couldn't sleep, nights where I begged God to give me my hair back. I awaited a miracle, but that never happened. And I can say with complete honesty and without exaggeration that this was the darkest moment of my life. Maybe you can relate. We know David can. The Bible describes King David as a man after God's own heart. He was God's chosen king. Yet he too went through an extremely dark time in his life. Shortly after David's victory over Goliath, King Saul began to get very irritable towards David. He was jealous of David, the shepherd boy, and the attention that David was getting. After returning from battle, the crowds cheered for David. They sang victory songs about David, and they held David in the highest regards. King Saul became increasingly jealous because as the people cheered on David, they forgot about him. He wanted to have the attention and the praise, but David just kept getting in the way. Saul's anger escalated to a point where he was actually prepared to kill David. And so David really had no choice but to flee his home, to flee from his wife, and from his friends, just in order to spare his own life. The book of 1 Samuel documents this story if you're interested in reading the details. But the point that I'm trying to make is that David is living in a nightmare, a very literal nightmare. He's on the run, scared of what Saul might do, anxious about where Saul might be. He's rejected, he's alone, and right now he's questioning if life will ever be the same again. David runs from city to city, from cave to cave, all in order to find refuge, seeking refuge and protection that are in the hills. Eventually, Saul dies, and David is able to show his head again and live normally. But not before a lot of things went wrong. Many years later, David has this to say in Psalms 121, and maybe you've heard these words before. He says, "I lift my eyes up to the hills. From where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth." Do you ever have that moment where a smell or a taste instantly transports you back to another place in another time? Well, for me, the smell of apple cinnamon takes me back to my grandmother's basement, where I sat watching hockey with my grandpa. David is having a similar experience here. He's not watching hockey, but as he lifts his eyes to the hills, that is, as he catches a glimpse of the hills, he's mentally transported back through time to the days of his escape. He remembers the sore feet from running, the anxious nights trying to stay hidden from Saul, the aching hurt of being rejected, the loneliness of not seeing his family. As he sees the hills, the thoughts and the emotions come rushing back to him. But this time, there's a difference. This time, he can see it all with the benefit of hindsight. When he comes to terms with all that has happened, he pens the rest of the psalm, that is Psalm 121, verses 1 to 4. He says this, "I lift my eyes up to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will never slumber nor sleep." Each time David saw the hills, it brought up flashbacks of fear and memories of hiding. But now, in hindsight, he was able to see clear enough to understand that through it all, it was God who had carried him. And it was God who protected him. He saw how it was God who provided for him, how God was present every step of the way. Sometimes we forget that, don't we? In the midst of our troubles, we forget that God is a God who is loyal, that God promises to be with us. Sometimes we can only see that in hindsight. And so I encourage you, when you get a chance, take a walk down memory lane. I encourage you to dip into the deep reservoir of God's faithfulness in your own life, and then use it as an encouragement for the challenges that you face today. Thanks, church, and I hope you enjoy your May long weekend.